When asked to list famous families, most people would mention talented and entertaining clans like the Baldwin brothers or Jackson 5. Those with a different interpretation of talented and entertaining, the Jonas brothers. One family act who probably doesn't come to mind, Charles and Chuckie Taylor. The Taylor family has been the subject of significant political hubbub lately, as both were recently charged with heinous crimes for their actions in Africa. Human Rights Watch reports that Charles, former president of Liberia, is currently being tried in The Hague for torture and war crimes in Sierra Leone. And while Dad established himself as one of the worst leaders of the 20th century, his penchant for violence is apparently all in the family. Interestingly, it is son Charles MacArthur Emanuel, or Chuckie, akin to his moniker-sharing horror film counterpart, whose behavior has far more serious implications. This past September, Chuckie was tried in the United States under the extraterritorial torture statute, a 1994 law that allows any person, whether a U.S. national or not, to be tried for torture committed anywhere. According to the January 9, 2009 Telegraph, Chuckie Taylor's case is the first time the statute has been used in its 14-year history. His trial, which ended in early 2009, could open a floodgate of prosecution for international torture offenders, including some important figures in past U.S. administrations. To understand why Foreign Policy magazine of January 2009 included this landmark case in its top 10 stories you missed in 2008, we must first discuss the history of the Taylor crimes, next examine the statute, before finally exploring some important implications of the Chuckie Taylor's prosecution. Ever since the Samuel Doe-led military coup in 1980, Liberia has been plagued with political and civil unrest. The January 9, 2009 Radio Netherlands Worldwide broadcast notes, from 1980 to 2003, 300,000 people were killed and 1.5 million displaced, largely resulting from the Taylor's actions. From 1989 to 1997, according to the January 23, 2008 Africa News, Massachusetts-educated Charles Taylor led the rebel group, the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, committing horrific human rights violations, including murder, rape, sexual slavery, mutilation, and the use of child soldiers. In 1997, he became president in a dubious democratic election and proceeded to militarily oppress political opposition and the press. Chuckie Taylor's involvement in these egregious acts was shorter-lived, yet much more graphic and brutal in nature. As Human Rights Watch reports on September 23, 2008, Taylor Jr., a Boston-born American citizen, moved to Liberia as a teenager. When Taylor Sr. created the Anti-Terrorist Unit, he tapped Chuckie as leader. As the October 3, 2008 New York Times explains, the organization, ominously known as the Demon Forces, committed a laundry list of torturous crimes. For example, the September 30, 2008 New Zealand Herald explains, the forces crammed prisoners together in pits, making them beg for occasional meals and urinate in the standing water. One victim, a member of a nonviolent political group, testified that when he refused to fight alongside the forces, he was stripped and blindfolded, whereupon soldiers cut off his genitals. After a coup removed Taylor Sr. from office in 2003, Chuckie was not heard from until 2006 when he tried to enter the United States with his father's doctored passport the day after his father was brought to The Hague. On December 6, 2006, just one day before he was to be sentenced for passport fraud, Chuckie Taylor was indicted on 8 counts of torture and other crimes against humanity. This important and largely unheard of case is the first time the extraterritorial torture statute has been used. Let's first unpack the statute's logistics and next examine its role in the Taylor case. As AllAfrica.com reports on September 23, 2008, the U.S. legislature passed the 1994 law to fulfill its obligations as a party of the UN Convention Against Torture. Article 5 of this declaration was meant to ensure that torturers had no safe havens. According to the Cornell University Law School U.S. Code Collection, The extraterritorial statute defines torture as any act specifically intended to inflict severe physical or mental pain or suffering upon another individual within his or her physical control or custody. Until 2007's genocide statute, the torture statute was unique in its global jurisdiction. A U.S. citizen could be taken in for torture committed anywhere, and any person physically within the United States could be tried for torture abroad. The law specifies that any person convicted of torture or conspiracy be imprisoned up to 20 years, and if the torture results in death, life in prison or the death penalty is recommended. The previously cited Radio Netherlands broadcast explains that while Liberia has a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the country has not tried cases involving serious crimes, and no international tribunal is mandated to prosecute past crimes in Liberia. The Taylor case, then, is a first, both nationally and legally. 5 victims testified at his 5-week trial, which began in September of 2008. One witnessed Chuckie stop a group at a checkpoint, shoot 3 people, and order another be beheaded. Before sentencing, the previously cited Telegraph notes, Taylor asked forgiveness from his victims. On January 9, 2009, Chuckie Taylor was sentenced to 97 years in prison. Reactions were largely optimistic. In a celebratory declaration, Mulba Morlu Jr., national chairman of the Voice of Liberia, stated, "This legal milestone will be a part of the slow healing process that has begun in post-war Liberia." And U.S. Assistant Attorney General Matthew Friedrich noted, "The lengthy prison term handed down today justly reflects the torture and horror that Taylor Jr. visited upon his victims." While 97 years seems to spell relief, for some, the case is cause for concern. 2 major implications exist: American accountability and judiciary hypocrisy. First, Chuckie Taylor's prosecution could allow us to try and imprison those who ordered and administered the violent and treacherous interrogation of detainees at Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, namely some figures in the Bush administration, including George Bush himself. As the May 1, 2008 Seattle Post-Intelligencer explains, President Bush admitted approving what he described as enhanced interrogation of prisoners. Unless proven that this simulated drowning does not result in severe physical or mental pain or suffering, the administration can be considered an offender under this law. Also, figures in our government were engaged in extraordinary rendition, taking prisoners to other countries to be interrogated. This could set the stage for a different type of rendition, laws enacted by other countries to try U.S. figures. With Barack Obama in office, accountability for these crimes may well be demanded. At the same time, there must be a reason that this law has sat untouched for 14 years, even with potential offenders in our midst. When it is readily acknowledged that unlawful interrogations were approved, it is clear that those in power see them as necessary to achieving some higher ideological goal, at which point there is no entity left to try the Bush administration. As Joanne Mariner, attorney at Human Rights Watch in New York, explains, one cannot help but wonder if torture is only considered deplorable when carried out by African warlords and their thuggish offspring. Torture may just be in the eye of the beholder. This hypocrisy of treating torture by foreign parties as an atrocious crime while justifying our own actions as legal technicalities could jeopardize our country's founding values and potential as peacekeeping arbiter. Chuckie Taylor was delivered justice, and his father still sits in The Hague. These are tremendously positive events for Liberians. Today, we have examined the Chuckie Taylor case, the just like new extraterritorial torture statute, and its implications. The statute could hold torturers everywhere accountable for their actions, leading to a much higher level of justice in countries all around the world. And thankfully, under current President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Liberia is in a substantially better place, largely because of the prosecution of the Taylor duo.
Nice.